It's funny how the most public victories can mask the deepest personal defeats. Beneath the blinding lights and roaring applause, some people aren't winning, they're crumbling. He didn't just leave her. He tried to erase her in front of the city's elite. Marcus Ellison held up his new fiancée like a trophy, a flawless, glittering prize, while casting his ex-wife, Lila Monroe, aside like a forgotten relic. He boasted about his upgrade, his brilliant future, his fiancée's perfect beauty, believing Lila was nothing without him, a ghost at the feast of her own life. But he made one catastrophic mistake. He assumed she was weeping in the shadows. He never imagined that while he was busy showing off a diamond, she had quietly accepted a diamond mine. What happens when a man's ego writes a check his reality can't cash? Stay with us. The air in the grand ballroom of the Mirabelle Hotel in downtown Los Angeles was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the annual Crescent Hope Foundation Gala, a night where LA's financial titans and social elite gathered to outbid, outdress, and outshine one another under the guise of philanthropy. For Lila Monroe, it was the first time she'd attended a major social event alone since her divorce from Marcus Ellison. She had built a name for herself through her contemporary art studio, becoming a respected space for emerging West Coast artists. But in these circles she was still, and perhaps forever would be, Marcus Ellison's ex-wife. She saw him across the room, a shark in a custom Armani tuxedo. And on his arm was Celeste Rowan. Celeste, Lila had to admit, was breathtaking. 10 years younger, with hair the color of polished copper, and a smile expertly calibrated for maximum charm and camera appeal. She was a TikTok influencer turned luxury lifestyle coach, a career that seemed to consist of being beautiful in expensive destinations. Lila was nursing a glass of champagne, speaking with an elderly board member about a potential arts endowment, when she felt a sudden shift in the room's energy. Marcus had taken the stage. It wasn't on the program, but a hefty last-minute donation had a way of creating new agenda items. "Good evening, everyone." Marcus's voice boomed, smooth and confident. He flashed a smile that had closed billion-dollar deals, and once upon a time captured her heart. "I just wanted to take a moment on this night of giving to speak about new beginnings, about finding true value." A ripple of polite applause. Lila felt a cold dread snake its way up her spine. She knew this tone. This was Marcus's "I'm the king of the world" voice. "As many of you know," he continued, gesturing for Celeste to join him on the stage, "the last year has been one of transition for me, but it has also been one of incredible discovery." He wrapped his arm around Celeste's impossibly small waist, pulling her close. The light from the chandeliers caught the enormous canary diamond on her left hand, sending a spray of yellow fire across the faces in the front row. "I discovered what it means to be with someone who truly inspires, someone whose beauty, inside and out, is an asset in itself." He beamed at Celeste, who blushed demurely. "When you're aiming for the top, you need a partner who looks the part, someone who shines, someone flawless." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. Lila remembered the nights she'd stayed up late helping him prep for presentations, proofreading his reports, using her design background to help him connect with eccentric, art-loving investors. She remembered sacrificing a trip to see her ailing grandfather because Marcus had a critical networking event. He used to call her his secret weapon. And now, in front of a room full of their former friends and colleagues, he was recasting her as a liability, a flawed prototype he'd had to discard. A man at a nearby table, a hedge fund manager named Reed Calloway, who had been a groomsman at their wedding, leaned over to his wife and whispered, not quite quietly enough, "That's a brutal shot at Lila. Ouch." Lila stood frozen, her champagne flute feeling heavy in her hand. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes darting between her and the radiant couple on stage. Some were pitying, others morbidly curious. It was a social execution, and she was the guest of honor. "So, I'd like to propose a toast," Marcus announced, raising his glass. "To my magnificent fiancée Celeste. Thank you for showing me what a perfect 10 really looks like, to a future that is as bright and beautiful as you are." The room erupted in applause, a mixture of genuine enthusiasm for the spectacle and nervous energy. Marcus's gaze swept the room, and for a fleeting moment his eyes met Lila's. There was no remorse in them, only a cold, triumphant glint. He was making a point. "I won. You lost." Lila didn't flinch. She held his gaze, her expression a careful mask of neutrality. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne. The bubbles tasted like ash in her mouth. Each swallow scraped down her throat like glass. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she kept them wrapped around the fragile stem of the glass, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Her chest felt tight, not with sadness, but with a cruel kind of pressure, as if all the oxygen had been sucked from the room and replaced with shame. When the toast was done, she placed the glass on a passing waiter's tray and turned with a poise she didn't feel, walking out of the ballroom. Her head held high. The clicking of her heels on the marble floor was the only sound she allowed herself to make. She didn't hear the whispers that followed her, the post-mortems of her public humiliation. But she could feel them, like invisible hands tugging at the hem of her dignity. Each step felt longer than the last, like she was walking through molasses. It wasn't just the sting of betrayal. It was the knowledge that it had been served to her on a stage, under crystal chandeliers, with applause. She only focused on the cool night air that would meet her outside, a welcome balm to the burning shame that licked at her cheeks. The ride back to her Hancock Park villa was a blur. Lila stared out at the glittering lights of Los Angeles, each one a pinprick in the dark fabric of her composure. The driver, a kind man named Raymond, whom she'd used for years, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with concern, but he said nothing. He had driven her and Marcus to countless events just like this one. He knew she didn't cry. The humiliation was too sharp, too cold for tears. It felt like a shard of ice lodged in her chest. Marcus hadn't just insulted her. He had retroactively devalued their entire life together. He had reframed 12 years of partnership as a business arrangement, one where she had failed to meet the aesthetic qualifications. Flawless. The word echoed in her mind. He wanted perfection, a doll to accessorize his ambition. She had been a person, with thoughts, dreams, and the occasional stress wrinkle. Her flaw was her humanity. Once inside her home, the silence was a welcome embrace. The space was entirely her own, filled with art that spoke to her, books she loved, and a sense of peace. Marcus's restless energy had always shattered that. She sank onto her velvet sofa, the adrenaline of her dignified escape finally ebbing away, leaving a profound weariness in its wake. She felt hollow, as if all the scaffolding that had once held up her identity had been knocked away in a single, glitzy moment. She had performed strength, and now that the performance was over, the ache of truth rushed in to fill the void. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from her best friend, Jenna. "I just heard what he did. That man is a monster. Are you okay? I'm coming over." Lila smiled faintly, grateful for the fierce loyalty. "I'm okay, honestly. Don't worry. Let's get lunch tomorrow. I have something to tell you." She put the phone down, and her gaze fell upon a framed photo on the mantelpiece, one she always kept turned away from the room. She picked it up. It wasn't of her and Marcus. It was a candid shot taken a few weeks ago in a small, sun-drenched cafe in Lisbon. In it, she was laughing, head thrown back, a splash of gelato on her nose. The man sitting across from her was looking at her, not the camera, and the expression on his face was one of such profound, unguarded affection that it made her heart ache in the best possible way. Colin Ashford. The name was an earthquake in the worlds of tech and global investment. Yet he was a ghost in the society pages. He was a notorious recluse, the architect of a digital infrastructure empire who valued his privacy above all else. They had met 6 months ago, not at a gala, but at her gallery. He'd come in on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, drenched and without an entourage, quietly browsing a new exhibition. He wasn't just looking at the price tags, he was seeing the art. They spoke for 2 hours about the brushstrokes of a particular piece, the artist's intent, the emotion it evoked. He didn't know who her ex-husband was, and for the first time in a long time she didn't feel like Lila, formerly Ellison. She was just Lila. Their relationship had blossomed away from the prying eyes of the world, a secret garden she had nurtured with fierce protectiveness. It was real and quiet and deep. It was everything her marriage to Marcus wasn't. Colin loved her for her mind, her passion, her laugh lines. He called the small scar above her eyebrow a souvenir from a childhood bike accident, the accent mark on his favorite word. He hadn't been at the gala tonight because he despised such events, calling them peacock parades. He was in London, closing a deal that would dwarf anything Marcus had ever touched. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was him. No text, just a FaceTime call. She took a deep breath, composed herself, and answered, forcing a smile. There she is. Colin's voice was a low, warm rumble that settled her frayed nerves instantly. He was in a hotel room, looking tired but happy. I was worried you'd be asleep. How was the peacock parade? It was as expected, she said, her voice even. Lots of feathers. He studied her face, his perception unnervingly sharp. You're wearing your armor. What happened, Lils? She hesitated. Then the dam broke. The words tumbled out, not in a torrent of anger, but in a flat, tired recitation of Marcus's speech, the toast, the canary diamond, the collective stare of the room. Colin listened without interruption, his expression hardening from concern to a still cold fury. When she finished, there was a long silence. That man, Colin said finally, his voice dangerously quiet, is a fool. A loud, insecure, and spectacularly cruel fool. He paused. Are you all right, my love? Truly, I am now, she whispered, and it was the truth. Saying it all out loud to him had put everything in perspective. Marcus was a noisy child banging a drum for attention. Colin was the quiet king who owned the kingdom. He makes me feel like I wasted so much of my life. Never, Colin said fiercely. You built a life. He just happened to be in it. He didn't make you who you are, Lila. Now, I have a question for you, and it has nothing to do with him. He shifted the camera on the table. Beside him was a simple, elegant black velvet box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on the dark silk, was a ring. It wasn't a garish boulder like Celeste's. It was a sapphire, the color of a twilight sky, cut in a classic elegant emerald shape and flanked by two subtle, perfectly matched diamonds. It was a ring that whispered. It didn't scream. It was timeless, just like the art he loved. I was going to do this in Lisbon next month, he said, his voice softening, in the cafe where we first felt like us, but I think now is a better time. I don't want you to have one more night where you feel devalued. Lila Monroe, you are the most brilliant, compassionate, and truly beautiful woman I have ever known. You are not an accessory. You are the entire collection. Will you marry me? The tears finally came, but they were not tears of shame or humiliation. They were tears of overwhelming, unexpected joy. The ice in her chest melted away, replaced by a warmth that spread through her entire body. Yes, she breathed, a laugh bubbling up through the tears. Colin, yes, of course, yes. Good, he said, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across his face. Now, about your ex-husband. I think it's time he learned a lesson about what true value really means. The morning after the gala, Marcus Ellison was riding a wave of self-satisfaction. His office at Ellison Equity Group, a sleek, minimalist space overlooking the glass and steel skyline of downtown LA, felt like a throne room. The story of his toast was already the talk of the town. He'd received half a dozen texts from friends and rivals alike, all variations on the same theme. Bold move. Ellison. Celeste's a stunner. Heard you put on a show last night. He was trending. He was relevant. He was the victor. His fiancée, Celeste, had been ecstatic. The photos of her and her ring were splashed across page 6 and every major society blog. Her Instagram follower count had jumped by 50,000 overnight. For her, the cruelty of the moment had been entirely eclipsed by the brilliance of the publicity. You were amazing, darling, she'd purred over breakfast at their penthouse apartment. So powerful. Everyone is talking about us. They're talking about a power couple. Marcus corrected her gently, sipping his espresso. That's the brand we're building. His focus today wasn't on social gossip, however. It was on the biggest deal of his career. The acquisition of CoreLogic's Dynamics, a cutting-edge AI logistics firm that was set to transform global supply chain operations. The company was privately held, notoriously selective about partners, and its reclusive founder had been playing hard to get. But Marcus was confident. He'd just secured a final round of funding from a global consortium of investors and was preparing an offer so aggressive it couldn't be refused. This deal would elevate him from a successful player to a legend. He spent the morning on calls with his legal team and European backers, his voice crisp with authority. Everything was falling into place. He even sent a smug, gloating text to a mutual acquaintance, knowing it would circle back to Lila. Tell me you saw the pictures from last night. Some things are just an upgrade in every possible way. Hope she's doing okay. He imagined Lila seeing it, picturing her quiet grief in her cozy Hancock Park villa. The thought gave him a little thrill of power. He had moved on to bigger and better things, while she was a relic of his past. Around noon, his private line rang. It was Reed Calloway, his former groomsman. "Marcus," Reed said, his voice strained. "We need to talk." "Reed, good to hear from you. You see the splash we made?" "I did. That's not why I'm calling. I'm hearing some strange chatter about the CoreLogix deal." Marcus's good mood soured slightly. "What kind of chatter? Everything's locked down on my end." "That's the thing. The street says CoreLogix isn't for sale anymore, at least not to you." Marcus sat up straighter. "What?" "I heard their board had an emergency meeting this morning. Something about a reevaluation of potential acquirers based on character and long-term vision." Marcus scoffed. "Character? This is finance, not Sunday school. They're just posturing to drive up the price. Don't worry about it." "I don't know, man." The word blacklist was used. "It's coming from a solid source." A knot of unease tightened in Marcus's stomach. "Blacklist? That's absurd. Who would have that kind of pull?" "No one's saying a name, just that the owner is particular, and he doesn't like loudmouths." Marcus ended the call with a curt dismissal, but the confidence he'd felt all morning had begun to fray. He instructed his assistant to get the CEO of CoreLogix Dynamics on the phone. Immediately, an hour passed, then another. His calls weren't being returned. His emails received automated replies. It was like a steel door had slammed shut. Meanwhile, in her quiet studio, Lila was having a very different kind of day. She and Colin had decided to keep their engagement private for a little while longer, to savor it for themselves before the inevitable media storm. The sapphire ring sat in its box in her safe, but she could feel its phantom weight on her finger. A secret, happy promise. She was in her office finalizing the details for a new exhibit when her phone lit up. It was Colin. "Morning, fiancé," he said. His voice was light, but she could hear an undercurrent of something else, something steely. "Morning, fiancé," she replied. The word tasted wonderful. "Is everything all right in London?" "Everything is perfect. I just had a very interesting conversation with my board," he said. "Specifically, the board of a little logistics company I founded a few years ago. You might have heard of it, CoreLogix Dynamics." Lila sat bolt upright. "Wait, you own CoreLogix Dynamics?" "I'm the sole owner," he confirmed. "I started it as a passion project. It's amusing what can grow when you're not chasing the spotlight." "It seems a man named Marcus Ellison has been trying very hard to buy it." Lila was speechless. The sheer cosmic irony of it was breathtaking. Marcus's career-defining deal, the one that was supposed to cement his legacy, was entirely in the hands of the man he had unwittingly tried to humiliate. "He doesn't know you're connected to it, does he?" she asked. "He has no idea," Colin said. And now she could hear the cold satisfaction in his voice. "He also doesn't know that my lead investor in London, the one who just helped me close. My current round was about to back his final offer for the acquisition," Colin said. "Was," past tense. The pieces clicked into place. Marcus thought he had his funding secured. He had no idea. The money was ultimately controlled by the same person whose company he was trying to buy, and whose fiancée he had just publicly humiliated. "This morning," Colin continued, "my team received an alert from our media monitoring service. It flagged an article from page 6. It featured a lovely photo of your ex-husband and his companion, and it quoted his toast from last night in its entirety. My board members were not impressed. They felt his brand, as he calls it, was not aligned with our company's values of discretion and respect." Marcus's own words, his own need for public validation, were being used as the very weapon to undo him. "So what happens now?" Lila asked, her heart beating fast. "For now, nothing," Colin said. "We're going to let him sweat. We're going to let him call and email and wonder why the deal of a lifetime just evaporated into thin air. Let him sit in his throne room and realize the walls are starting to close in. Some lessons," he added, "are best learned in silence." A week passed. For Marcus Ellison, it was a week of escalating frustration that curdled into raw panic. The silence from CoreLogix Dynamics was absolute and deafening. His calls went to voicemail. His emails remained unanswered. The ironclad deal he had boasted about was now a ghost, a phantom he couldn't grasp. Worse, the whispers across the financial world had grown into a steady, damning murmur. Rumors circulated that Ellison Equity Group was unstable, that Marcus had lost his touch. The European investors, who had once been so eager to back him, suddenly became evasive. Their promised capital, the lifeblood of his acquisition, was now indefinitely delayed pending market review. A flimsy excuse. He knew it was a lie. He was being professionally iced out, and he had no idea why or by whom. The pressure began to take its toll on his meticulously curated life. The penthouse apartment, once a symbol of his dominance, now felt like a gilded cage. His relationship with Celeste, built on the shallow bedrock of mutual vanity, began to show hairline cracks. "Why are you so tense all the time?" she asked one evening, scrolling through her phone. She was lying on a white chaise lounge, perfectly posed for a selfie. "You're ruining the vibe." "The vibe, Celeste?" Marcus snapped, pacing the length of their floor-to-ceiling windows. "The biggest deal of my life is imploding for no reason, and you're worried about the vibe?" "Well, it's not my fault," Celeste pouted, turning the phone's camera on herself to check her reflection. "Maybe you just weren't as good as you thought you were. Did you think about that?" The comment, intended to be petulant, struck a raw nerve. It was the one possibility Marcus's ego refused to entertain. "This is a coordinated attack," he seethed, more to himself than to her. "Someone is doing this to me." His paranoia grew. He yelled at his assistants, accused his lawyers of incompetence, and saw conspiracy in every delayed response. He tore through his office like a man possessed, slamming drawers, rereading email threads, demanding loyalty in increasingly shrill tones. The more the world ignored him, the louder he became, like a fading spotlight refusing to dim. The confident, charming titan of finance was being replaced by a snarling, desperate man. Celeste, who had signed up to be the fiancée of a winner, watched his transformation with growing distaste. The power and success that had once attracted her were evaporating, leaving behind only a bitter, angry man. He no longer dazzled, he ranted, he no longer impressed, he sulked. Even the tailored suits and sharp watches looked ill-fitting under the weight of his unraveling bravado. This wasn't part of the brand she wanted for herself. Meanwhile, Lila's life was moving in the opposite direction. She and Colin had spent the week in a bubble of quiet joy. He had flown back from London, and they spent their evenings not at galas, but cooking together in her cozy kitchen or taking long walks through Griffith Park after dark, unrecognized and untroubled. They talked about the future, not about assets and branding, but about values and dreams. He wanted to fund a foundation that would make art accessible to children in underserved communities, an idea born from her own passion. She wanted to travel with him, not to be seen, but to see the world. Their lives were weaving together, creating a tapestry rich with shared meaning and mutual respect. One evening, they were sitting by the fire in her living room when Colin's tablet chimed. He glanced at it, a faint frown touching his lips. "What is it?" Lila asked. "It's the quarterly report from my family office," he said. "It lists all my direct and indirect holdings." "There's something here I didn't realize." He turned the tablet to show her. It displayed a complex flowchart of investments and shell corporations. His finger rested on one box. "Ashford Holdings owns a majority stake in a Swiss private equity firm," he said. "That firm, in turn, is the primary backer of the European investor consortium Marcus was relying on for his CoreLogic's bid." Lila stared at the screen. "Oh, so the money he was counting on was your money all along." "Effectively, yes. He was trying to buy my company with my own capital, and he never even knew it." Colin said it with a grim sort of wonder in his voice. The man's arrogance is matched only by his lack of due diligence. This was the final piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just that Colin owned the target company. He controlled the funding to acquire it. He had Marcus in a financial pincer movement, and Marcus was so blind he couldn't even see the jaws closing in. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Marcus had hired a private investigator, an expensive ex-MI6 agent named Zev, to find out who was behind CoreLogic's dynamics. For days, Zev came up empty. The ownership was buried under layers of impenetrable offshore corporations. But Marcus was relentless, paying an exorbitant fee for Zev to dig deeper. Finally, late one Friday afternoon, Marcus got the call. "I have a name," Zev said, his voice gravelly. "It cost a fortune to get, and I had to break 3 different kinds of laws. But I have it." "Who is it?" Marcus demanded, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone. "Who owns CoreLogix?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "The ultimate beneficiary, at the very top of the food chain, is a man named Colin Ashford." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Colin Ashford, the tech billionaire, the recluse. He'd never met the man, but he knew the legend. Ashford was in a different league entirely. He was old money, new money, and every kind of money in between. Why would a man like that want to ruin him? They didn't travel in the same circles. They had no history. It made no sense. He hung up the phone, his mind racing. He now had a name for his tormentor, but the motive was a complete mystery. He paced his office, the feeling of powerlessness gnawing at him. He, Marcus Ellison, who prided himself on knowing everyone and everything, had been blindsided. He looked out the window at the city below, the city he had intended to conquer. And for the first time, he felt small and very, very vulnerable. He had no idea the real reason for his downfall was sitting by a fireplace just a few miles uptown, her hand resting gently on the arm of the man who was quietly and systematically dismantling his world. Marcus's obsession with Colin Ashford consumed him. He ordered his team to compile a complete dossier on the man, every known investment, every rumored venture, every charity affiliation. The more he learned, the more insignificant he felt. Ashford operated on a global scale that made Ellison Equity Group. It looked like a child's lemonade stand by comparison, but the central question remained a maddening void. Why? Why would this financial titan target him? Marcus couldn't find a single connection. No rival bids, no crossed paths, no social slights he could recall. He even had Zev, the investigator, dig into Ashford's personal life, but the man was a digital phantom. There were no scandalous photos, no bitter exes, no public presence. The man's privacy was a fortress. Marcus was fighting a shadow, and it was driving him insane. He wasn't just losing a deal. He was unraveling. His days began with frantic calls and ended in silent, sleepless nights, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every conversation, wondering what invisible misstep had led him here. His deal was dead. His reputation was in tatters. He was bleeding investors who no longer trusted his judgment. It was on a Tuesday morning, a miserable, rainy day that matched his mood, that the bomb finally dropped. It didn't come in the form of a market crash or a legal notice. It came on the cover of Prestige, the city's most influential luxury lifestyle magazine, a publication more powerful than the Financial Times in the circles Marcus so desperately wanted to remain in. His assistant, a young woman he'd been terrorizing for weeks, placed the magazine on his desk with trembling hands. "Mr. Ellison, I think you need to see this." Marcus glanced at it dismissively, and then froze. The cover was a masterpiece of understated elegance. It was a photograph of 2 people, not in a studio, but in what looked like a private garden bathed in soft natural light. A man with dark hair and a quiet, confident smile had his arm around a woman. The woman was leaning into him, her face alight with a serene, genuine happiness Marcus had never seen on her before. Her hand rested on his chest, and on her finger, a magnificent twilight blue sapphire seemed to pull all the light in the room toward it. It wasn't just the ring, it was the way she looked, alive, cherished, untouched by the venom he had tried to infect her with. The woman was Lila. The man was Colin Ashford. The headline in bold, sophisticated font read, "Silent Power, Colin Ashford and Lila Monroe on love, art, and the new meaning of success." Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis. He snatched the magazine, his hands shaking as he flipped to the feature story. The article was a 10-page spread filled with stunning photographs, of them at Lila's gallery, in the library of a sprawling country estate that was clearly Colin's, walking hand in hand through a Lisbon piazza. The text was even more devastating than the images. It was a glowing profile, positioning them as the city's new intellectual and cultural power couple. It detailed Colin's quiet philanthropy, his brilliant business mind, and his deep respect for Lila's work. It praised Lila's keen eye for art, her resilience, and her grace. It spoke of her new chapter after a difficult divorce, painting her not as a victim, but as a phoenix who had risen, stronger and more radiant than ever. And then there was the quote from Colin, The journalist had asked him what drew him to Lila. In a world full of people shouting to be noticed, Ashford was quoted as saying, "She is a person of substance. She doesn't need to be the center of attention because she is her own center. She is an original, not a copy. She is, in a word, flawless." Flawless. The word. His word. The one Marcus had once weaponized to humiliate her, now used to elevate her to a pedestal he could never hope to climb. It was a calculated, devastatingly precise counterstrike. The article went on to announce their engagement, describing the sapphire ring not by its carat weight, but by its history. A rare, ethically sourced stone from a forgotten mine in Sri Lanka. It was a subtle but clear dig at the loud, flashy, and utterly conventional canary diamond he had given Celeste. Marcus stared at the photograph of them, his mind finally, horrifically connecting the dots. CoreLogic's dynamics. The European investors, the whispers, the blacklist. It wasn't business. It had never been about business. It was personal. Ashford hadn't attacked him because he was a rival. He had dismantled him because he was Lila's ex-husband. The woman Marcus had discarded and publicly mocked was engaged to the very man who now held his entire professional future in the palm of his hand. He let out a strangled, guttural sound, a mixture of a laugh and a sob. He had been playing checkers, moving his pieces with smug arrogance, while Colin Ashford had been playing three-dimensional chess since the moment Marcus opened his mouth at that gala. He thought he was delivering the killing blow, when all he had done was announce his own execution. His office door creaked open. It was Celeste. She was holding her own copy of the magazine, her face pale, her professionally applied makeup unable to hide the shock in her eyes. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you see this? Is this real?" Marcus looked from the magazine to his fiancée, and for the first time he didn't see her as a trophy. He saw her as a liability, a symbol of his own shallow, catastrophic miscalculation. The beautiful, flawless accessory to his success was now the living embodiment of his failure. "Yes," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "It's real." He watched the calculation unfold in Celeste's eyes, the dawning realization that the brand she had so carefully attached herself to was now toxic. The power, the money, the status, it was all gone, or soon would be. And it had all been taken away by the quiet, unassuming woman he was so certain he had left in the dust. That realization hit like a thunderclap. Not just because it threatened to dismantle everything he'd built, but because it exposed a terrifying truth. He had misjudged the very thing he prided himself most on, control. And now, standing across from Celeste, he could feel it slipping like sand through his fingers. The fallout from the Prestige article was not a gentle decline. It was an avalanche. Marcus's phone, which had been ominously silent for weeks, began to melt down. It became a cacophony of calls, from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and a dozen salivating gossip blogs, all clamoring for a comment. His carefully curated image was shattered, replaced by a single humiliating caricature. The arrogant ex-husband. The fool who had thrown away a queen, unaware that a king was waiting in the wings. He was no longer the victor in his own narrative. He was now the villainous side character in Lila's far more compelling one. Each headline felt like a hammer blow. The empire he once ruled with a phone and a grin was now a crumbling facade. The same people who once returned his calls in seconds now sent them to voicemail. The silence was louder than any accusation. He retreated to his penthouse, drawing the heavy silk blinds as if to shut out the world. But there was no escaping the truth. He could see it in Celeste's eyes. The fading adoration she once had for him had curdled into a cold, appraising stare. She was looking at him and seeing a bad investment, a stock that had plummeted overnight. "You have to fix this," she demanded, her voice sharp and brittle. She wasn't just scrolling through her phone anymore. She was packing. Not a small overnight bag, but a large Louis Vuitton trunk, its jaws open and hungry for her expensive belongings. "Fix it? How am I supposed to fix it, Celeste?" he snarled, pacing the vast living room like a caged animal. "The man is Colin Ashford. He's a legend. He could buy and sell me 1,000 times over and not even notice the charge on his credit card." "That's not my problem," she shot back, throwing a silk dress into the trunk with a violent flick of her wrist. "I attached myself to your name, Marcus. I put my brand on the line for you. I stood on that stage and smiled while you humiliated your ex-wife, all because you promised me a certain kind of life. Now, your name is Mud. You're a laughingstock, which means I'm a laughingstock. So you're just leaving? He asked, a wave of incredulous rage washing over him. After everything? Just like that? My mother always told me to cut my losses, she said coolly, not even bothering to look at him as she carefully folded a cashmere sweater. This is me cutting my losses. She snapped the trunk shut, the sound echoing the finality of her words. She walked to the marble countertop by the door, picked up the enormous canary diamond ring, and held it between her thumb and forefinger as if it were contaminated. She let it drop. It skittered across the polished stone with a clatter that sounded obscenely loud in the silent room. You can have this back, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. It's probably the only valuable asset you have left, and frankly, it's starting to look tacky. She walked out without a backward glance, her heels clicking in angry rhythm on the marble floor. The door closed softly behind her, leaving Marcus alone in the cavernous apartment with the ghost of his ambition. For a long moment, he didn't move. The silence, once his ally, now pressed down like a weight on his chest. The place felt colder without her in it, as if her departure had siphoned the last bit of warmth from the walls. The ring on the counter glinted in the dim light, a gaudy emblem of a future that had just slipped through his fingers. Fueled by a toxic cocktail of rage, humiliation, and half a bottle of Macallan 25, Marcus made his final, most foolish move. He stormed out of his apartment, got in his car, and drove to Lila's gallery. He had to see her, to confront her, to force her to acknowledge the destruction she had brought upon him. He burst into the gallery, a wild look in his eyes. The space was serene, a stark contrast to the storm raging within him. He found Lila in the main exhibition hall, calmly discussing the placement of a new sculpture with her assistant. She looked radiant, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue dress. She wore an aura of confidence that was more dazzling than any jewel. "Lila," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. She turned, her expression calm, unsurprised. She dismissed her assistant with a gentle nod. "Marcus, you shouldn't be here." "Shouldn't I?" He stalked toward her, his voice rising with every step. "You did this, you and him. This was your revenge plot, wasn't it? My deal, my investors, you planned it all. A meticulous little scheme to ruin me." Lila looked at him, not with fear or anger, but with a profound, weary pity. That enraged him further. "You give me far too much credit, Marcus, and yourself far too little. I didn't have to lift a finger." "Don't lie to me," he spat, his face inches from hers. "That article, that quote, flawless. He used my own word against me. That was a dagger, and you twisted it." "The only thing I'm guilty of," she said, her voice remaining level and strong, "is falling in love with a good man who sees me for who I am. The rest? That was all you. You were the one who stood on a stage and announced to the world that a woman's worth is measured by her appearance. You were the one so blinded by your own ego that you never bothered to do your research on a $10 billion company. You were so busy building a brand that you forgot to build a character." She took a step closer. There was no hesitation in her stance, no fear in her eyes, only clarity, the kind that comes after years of being underestimated. And for the first time he saw not the quiet, accommodating woman he had married, but the powerful, self-possessed woman she had become. He instinctively took a step back. "Colin didn't ruin you, Marcus," Lila said, her voice steady. "He just held up a mirror, and you shattered it. He didn't have to attack you. He just sat back and watched you self-destruct. That toast at the gala wasn't a shot at me. It was a public confession of your own deep-seated insecurity and superficiality. And in his world, in the world of real power and substance, that's a fatal flaw. You weren't defeated in a hostile takeover, Marcus. You were simply disqualified from a game you didn't even know you were playing." Every word was the unvarnished truth, and it landed with the force of a physical blow. His breath hitched, not from pain, but from the sudden realization of everything he had refused to see. The rage and scotch couldn't protect him from it. The fire in his chest died out, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness. He had built his entire identity on a foundation of perceived success and public approval, and in a matter of weeks it had all turned to dust. He looked around the gallery, at the bold, challenging pieces of art, and at the woman he had once so casually and cruelly discarded. He had traded her for a reflection, and the reflection had shattered. He had boasted about his fiancée's fleeting beauty, never realizing that his ex-wife possessed a strength and grace infinitely more valuable and infinitely more powerful. He started, but the words wouldn't come. What was there to say? He hadn't lost to her. He hadn't lost to Colin Ashford. He had lost to himself. "You should go, Marcus," Lila said softly, turning her back to him as she studied the sculpture. It wasn't rejection, it was release. And that somehow cut deeper. The conversation was over. His part in her life was finally and truly finished. 6 months later, the name Marcus Ellison was a ghost on Wilshire Boulevard, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones in private lounges and rooftop clubs. Ellison Global Holdings had collapsed with spectacular speed, its assets liquidated in a fire sale to cover a mountain of debt. The penthouse in Westwood, once a monument to his success, was sold at a humbling loss. Marcus's last public sighting didn't appear in prestige or fortune, but in a grainy, candid photo snapped outside a quiet bistro in Santa Monica. He was having lunch with his parents. There was no Rolex on his wrist, no tailored suit, just a rumpled shirt and tired eyes. The famous swagger was gone, replaced by the weary, stooped shoulders of a man crushed under the weight of his own hubris. He stared into his water glass, avoiding the disappointed eyes of his father. He had learned the hardest lesson of all. The view from the top of a molehill is still just a few feet off the ground, and the fall is just as painful. For Lila and Colin, life had become a masterclass in quiet, deliberate joy. Their wedding was the antithesis of the Crescent Hope Gala. They married on a sun-drenched cliffside terrace in Big Sur, overlooking the shimmering Pacific Ocean. There were no press, no crowds, just 20 of their closest family and friends. Lila wore a simple, breathtakingly elegant gown designed by a young creative she had helped launch. Her bouquet was made of olive branches and fragrant white peonies. Colin, in a tailored linen suit, looked at her as if she were the only person on earth. Their vows weren't about mergers or metrics. They spoke of shared values, mutual respect, and a partnership built on truth. The only photographer was Jenna, Lila's best friend, who captured moments of genuine laughter and stolen kisses, not staged tableaus for a glossy spread. Their life together became a seamless blend of their passions. The Art Spark Foundation wasn't a vanity endeavor. It was their shared mission. They poured tens of millions into establishing state-of-the-art creative centers in public schools across the country. One afternoon, they visited the first completed center in East LA. They walked through a sunlit room filled with children painting, sculpting, and composing music on brand-new equipment. A young girl with paint-smeared cheeks proudly showed Lila her vibrant canvas. In that moment, watching the spark of creativity ignite in a child's eyes, Lila felt a sense of purpose more profound than any gallery opening or social conquest. She was no longer defined by the men in her past. She was Lila Monroe, philanthropist, art expert, and co-architect of a meaningful legacy. One crisp autumn evening, they stood on the terrace of their new home, a stunning, modern sanctuary perched above the rolling hills of Sonoma. Far from the city's chaos, the architecture was refined but unpretentious, designed to embrace the landscape, not dominate it. It was a home, not a monument. Colin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist as she looked out at the horizon. The twilight sky was a swirl of violet and ember, a masterpiece no artist could replicate. "What are you thinking about, my love?" he asked softly, resting his chin on her shoulder. She was quiet for a moment, watching the lights begin to twinkle on the distant hillside. "Do you remember that night?" she asked. "The gala?" "I try not to," he murmured into her hair. "But I'll never forget the look in your eyes when I called you on FaceTime. The strength holding back so much pain. I felt so small," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "So erased. I think a part of me, for 12 years, had accepted his definition of value. I thought my worth was tied to his success." When he stood up there and said those things, she continued, it was like he was confirming my deepest, darkest fear, that I was disposable. "And now?" Colin prompted gently. Lila turned in his arms to face him, her own eyes clear and luminous. She reached up and touched the faint scar above his eyebrow, a gesture of intimate familiarity. "Now I know that my value was never his to define," she said. It was always mine to own. My life with him wasn't a waste. It was a long, difficult, and ultimately necessary education. It taught me the difference between glitter and gold, between noise and substance, between a brand and a soul. In a way, his cruelty was a gift. It broke the last chain and set me free. It led me here, to you. Colin smiled, his eyes filled with the same unguarded affection she'd first seen in that photograph from Florence. He was a fool, Lila, Colin said quietly. A man dying of thirst while standing in a river, because he was too captivated by his own reflection to see the life-giving water all around him. He never saw you. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was both passionate and peaceful. A testament to the quiet, unshakable world they had built together. It wasn't a life of drama or revenge. It was a life of purpose, partnership, and profound love. They had won, not by defeating an enemy, but by simply choosing to build a better world. One that had no room for the shallow cruelty of men like Marcus Ellison. The best revenge, they both knew, wasn't a cold dish served in public. It was a warm, beautiful life, lived well, authentically, and far, far away from the noise. In the end, this was never a story about revenge. It was a story about value. Marcus Ellison saw value in surfaces, in trophies, in the roar of the crowd. He built a life made of glass, and was shocked when it shattered. Lila, on the other hand, learned to find value in substance, in character, and in the quiet strength of her own heart. She built a life made of stone and created a legacy. Her story is a powerful reminder. True power isn't about who you can step on to get to the top. It's about how many people you can lift up once you're there. So the story is over, our wonderful friends. Are you still here at this hour? If you're still watching, if you've made it all the way through Lila's journey, then maybe, just maybe, something about her story stirred something deep in you. And if it did, let's take a moment, you and I, to breathe that in. Because this wasn't just about a man losing his power, or a woman finding a new love. This was a story about reclaiming worth, about shedding the lies others try to write for us, and rewriting our truth. It's about understanding what really matters, not the applause, not the image, not the gold-plated victories that crumble under pressure. What matters is who we become in silence, who we choose to be when no one's watching. Lila teaches us that our value was never someone else's to define. She reminds us that healing doesn't always arrive with grand gestures or fiery revenge. It can come quietly, in a moment of stillness, a look across a room, a truth finally spoken. As Rumi once said, try not to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you. And Colin shows us that real power is often silent. It moves with grace. It doesn't need to shout because it's too busy building, protecting, loving. So if you're still here with us, ask yourself, where in your life have you let someone else define your worth? And what would happen if you stopped? What might you build from that freedom? If this story resonated with you, even just a little, if it gave you hope, clarity, or simply reminded you that strength and kindness are not mutually exclusive, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because there are more stories waiting to lift us up, and we'd be honored to share them with you. Until next time, be kind to yourself. Build your life from stone, not glass. And remember, the quietest lives often leave the loudest legacies.